Hey guys, how are you today? It's me, Mrs. Snook. Today I'm going to be talking about Chapter 3, Section 3. So we're continuing to talk about Reconstruction. Remember the period of time after the Civil War when America is trying to come back together as as one nation. And last time we talked a lot about President Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Remember, it's called the 10% plan, where he felt that 10% of the people in a state should take an oath of loyalty, and then that state could, come back into the Union. Unfortunately, Lincoln's plan was not popular, we said, with many of the people in Congress because they felt that 10% really isn't a lot of people. I mean, 10% is not nearly a majority. To have 10% of the people say, oh, I'm sorry, we killed a bunch of Northerners and we committed treason and we're pro-slavery, they didn't feel that was enough. They wanted more revenge on the South. They wanted a true sense of loyalty. They just wanted more. So remember we said that Wade and Davis were two senators, and they felt at least 50% of the people in the South, and we're talking about men. Unfortunately, ladies, we have no rights whatsoever. That men, and white men at that, who could vote in 1860, once they said they were sorry, then a state could be returned. Remember, Lincoln used a pocket veto, and so that plan was never accepted. And Lincoln was most likely going to charge ahead with his plan. He was all about being amicable, about being friendly. Now, he was never going to let the top generals return to office. He really wasn't planning on paying for the South's debts, and he was supportive of giving African Americans rights. But we'll never know what would have happened because, of course, 5 days after the Civil War comes to an end, John Wilkes Booth kills Abraham Lincoln. And so the man that you see in the picture, Andrew Johnson, becomes the president. Now, Andrew Johnson is a Democrat, and you might say, that's strange. It is. That's totally strange, because Lincoln, remember, was a Republican. In modern politics, you don't usually have people of two different political parties on one presidential ticket, meaning you don't have someone who is one political party as president and their vice president as a different political party. So why did Lincoln do it? He was looking to get support from those border states. He was really worried that Missouri and some of those other states were going to secede from the Union. So when he was running for re-election in 1864 against McClellan, remember, one of the generals that he'd fired, he was worried people might not re-elect him, that they'd say Lincoln's losing this war, that it's never going to come to an end, that we're never going to beat the South, that he might still, end slavery everywhere. So by having this Democrat from the South, from Tennessee, be on his ballot, or his ticket as they call it, and be the potential president one day, that made people kind of like him more and say, okay, he's not that extreme, he's not that crazy in his views, he's willing to see the other side of the coin. And so it worked, and he obviously got reelected. Plus, he'd had those victories towards the end of the war with the help of General Grant and General Sherman. So the thing about Andrew Johnson was he is an old school racist. I mean, he's a hardcore white supremacist. There's no other way to sugarcoat this. I mean, look at the quote that I've got there. He says, damn the Negroes. I'm fighting these traitorous aristocrats, their masters. So there's no way to sugarcoat that, he cared about African Americans or anything like that. He basically was just angry that how dare the Southern planters and these aristocrats, as he's called, these wealthy men, think that they have more power than the national government. So he was really focused on the power struggle, but he is not one to really care about Black rights. And that's going to be the real problem, because now that he is the president and he thinks he is in charge of Reconstruction, because he comes to office and Congress is going to basically be on spring break. They take a long spring-summer session at this point in history. And so they're kind of, I'm going to go back a slide, sorry. I'm just I have a cough that's going on this morning. No, I don't think I'm sick. I think it's just allergies. I guess I can't move that window. I was trying to, but all it says at the top there is President Johnson's plan, 10% plus. So this 10% plus plan is similar to the plan that Lincoln proposed, but it's really all about a blanket pardon. Meaning what Johnson says is he basically, instead of requiring 10% to say they're sorry, he kind of would just look at a group of people and he goes, you guys all sorry for what you did, that you killed all these people, that you rebelled against the United States? And they all go, yeah. And he goes, okay, you're forgiven. And that's it. It's a very simple blanket pardon. It's a loyalty oath. And he said, you guys can have back all your old property, your horses, your guns, you name it. You can have it all back. and he is going to just offer you friendship, or what we call amnesty, and everybody is forgiven. Now, the very top military officers, we're talking about like Jefferson Davis and General Lee, are not going to get forgiven. They're not going to get the ability to run for political office. But unlike Lincoln's plan, okay, so it's similar to Lincoln's plan because they have to all say they're sorry, but it's not requiring a certain percentage like the 10% plan. He was hoping that more than 10% would say they're sorry. Most did because they just kind of took a group oath. It didn't like single anybody out. But unlike Lincoln's plan, I mean, similar because Davis and Lee couldn't return to political office, but otherwise, everybody else basically just gave Johnson and the U.S. government money, and now they can run for office again. So it's kind of a sneaky deal. All you have to do is say you're sorry, and now you basically can run for office again. So what we're going to start seeing is that these states are very quick to take Johnson's plan, and they're like, ooh, look. Everybody says they're sorry at once, big deal, like that means anything. We're all forgiven, we all get our property back. And now these people who had been like high-ranking, not like high, not like Jefferson Davis, not like the president, but kind of up there in the Confederate government, in the Confederate States of America, or as far as their military, now they can run for political office. So they start creating new state constitutions, they start, supposedly, having elections, and they're electing people to the U.S. Senate, to the U.S. House of Representatives, and they're super racist. And they basically are going to try to create a new form of slavery, even though slavery is illegal. They are going to have to accept that slavery is illegal, but they're going to be creating this new form of slavery with black codes. So this is pretty awful. The fact that if you look down here at the effects, I've got it disenfranchised certain leading Confederates. So like I said, Jefferson Davis, General Lee, they're still out. Okay, but otherwise it pardons the vast majority of the planners and the aristocrats that they're able to take power. And yes, it is going to make the Republicans in Congress, whether they were moderate, kind of in the middle of the view, or radical at the other end of the view, they're very angry because they're like, what the heck is going on here? All of a sudden, they can't have slavery in the South, but they're creating these new governments with the same old people in power. And it looks like nothing's changed because now they're coming out with these black codes, which basically limit what African Americans can do, and this is ridiculous. The only thing that really was the South didn't like about Johnson's plan was, of course, they had to abolish slavery and that they had to refuse to pay their war debts. So, for example, if they had, taken out a loan from Mexico, they basically have to tell Mexico, haha, we're not going to pay you back. And Mexico might come to the U.S. government and say, who's going to pay back this loan? And the U.S. is like, well, we're not going to pay it back because you shouldn't have given them the money to begin with. It was basically a way to show other countries which had supported the South and given out loans to the Confederacy, don't mess with the United States. You're never going to get this money back. We view you as a traitor now. So here's just a political cartoon of the era. And it just kind of shows you that this is 1866. So the Civil War is over. And this is supposedly the land of the free, the home of the brave. And so technically, you've got Lady Liberty here, and you've got, slavery is supposedly dead and it's over. We've got civil rights. We've had the Emancipation Proclamation passed. But in reality, now that they've passed these black codes, basically some of the work conditions, she literally stated you had to sign like a legal contract if you were an African American who needed a job, which of course you did because you're no longer a slave, you need a home, you can't read or write, you don't have any place to sleep. Yes, the government has created the Freedmen's Bureau, which is trying to help you out with food, shelter, and education. But to get a job, you would have to sign a labor contract that might actually say they have the right to beat you if you're a minute late to work, or you take too long of a bathroom break, or they feel that you haven't picked enough cotton today, and they have the right to whip you. And of course you might say, well, that's cruel and unusual punishment. That's wrong, that's immoral. Well, they're getting away with it. And this is why Republicans in Congress, as they come back from their summer break, back into the winter session, into December of 1866, they are appalled. They are angry. They say this is wrong. This is basically a new form of slavery, and Johnson's plan is ridiculous. Specifically, President Johnson granted 13,500 special pardons. So what we're getting at is about 14,000 people who would have never been able to run for political office, to get a job in the military, under Lincoln's plan and under the Wade Davis Davis bill, these people were considered, not the best, that they'd been top dogs in the Confederacy. They'd been top in, the Confederate Army. Why should these people, have any power in America? They're the true kind of traitors. They're the leaders. They're not just some guy who was drafted or who fought because he thought he should. These are the people who were in charge. Yet these people all get pardoned, and most of them end up taking control and power in the southern states. And how do they do it? They have money. That's what it's all about. If you give Johnson money, you make a little donation, to some charity he cares about, which usually is himself. And you might say, well, that totally sounds like blackmail, or this sounds like some kind of underhanded, fraudulent deal. It is. And he looks the other way and he pardoned you. And so the South, like I said, is getting away with murder as they're passing these black codes, which are really limiting the rights of African Americans. And it's definitely causing alarm among many of the radical Republicans in Congress, and even some of the moderate Republicans. Examples of the black codes, they were all sorts of stuff. I mean, they were like pages and pages. They would basically say, like, yes, we have to agree that slavery is no more. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but African Americans can't own guns. African Americans can't go out after 7 p.m. African Americans can't hold public meetings. They can't take books out of libraries. They can't rent any property. They can't open their own business. They have to sign those contracts I was talking about if they work on a farm or as a servant. So they have to do all of these different things, which is ridiculous because white people didn't have to do any of those things. I mean, obviously to get a gun in today's day and age, in Illinois, you have to have a FOID card. And if you are going to have some kind of public meeting, yes, you need to rent out the space, or if it's going to be a protest, you need to fill out the appropriate paperwork. And yes, you have a rental agreement. But black people are simply stricken and forbidden from doing this just because of the color of their skin. And of course, for black women, it was even worse for black men. But yeah, this is just crazy. It's simply about racism as we start to see the rise of the KKK and things like that in the South. And so for many African Americans, it's like, did anything really change? I mean, yes, people are allowed to live with their families now and have their names, and before, literally, slaves didn't even get to pick their own names. But in many ways, things haven't improved all that much. Many African Americans are going to be forced into what we call sharecropping, where literally they're not able to buy their own land. Since there were all these requirements set up in the states which said, basically you can't rent a property, you can't rent land, you can't buy land because you're black. And so they are pretty much forced into a system where they have to go and work somebody else's land, okay? And they work somebody else's land as basically, just basically as an employee, and they make money off of that. And then they're allowed to basically use that money, and then they can kind of work a small piece of property and eventually buy that property as their own. Sometimes in sharecropping, you would be paid basically instead of money in basically crops, and then you could use those crops to feed your family. You could also sell those at a store and such. To buy supplies, because we still see somewhat of a barter system going on. Now you might say, why is the South doing this? Of course, because they're racist, but also because they're cheap. They don't want to pay African Americans for the work, for the hourly wages that they're due to do this farm labor. And so they're trying to go back to an era pre-Civil War in this antebellum period, which is awful. Now, at this point, what we're going to see happen is that Congress is starting to get really mad, really worked up. And they try talking to President Johnson about it, and he doesn't seem to care. He seems to think everything in the South is proceeding just fine. And they're hearing stories of acts of violence, they're hearing stories of African Americans who are getting lynched or hung from a tree, and the local police are racist, and they're letting whites get away with this. And it's ridiculous. So Congress decides that they are going to pass something called the Civil Rights Act in March of 1866. And if you're choosing the timeline option for your Reconstruction Choice Board, you've got some dates you could use here. You could also use the dates that are in the textbook if you just follow along in Chapter 3, Section 3. But in March of 1866, they come out with the Civil Rights Act, which basically says everybody deserves the same equal rights. Meaning there shouldn't be any kind of type of slavery or involuntary servitude. People shouldn't have to jump through all these extra hoops. They should be treated equally. And as you can imagine, Johnson is a racist and he vetoes it. He has no desire to let a law like that pass. He's thinking about already getting elected himself, and he's got a lot of supporters in the South. So Congress is outraged that he vetoed, that he rejected this law. So the radical Republicans, who wanted a lot of change, who are pushing for African Americans to get the right to vote, they kind of team up with more of the moderate Republicans, the ones in the middle, and they pass this Civil Rights Act. It's the first time that a president's veto has been really overridden with such a high majority. And now they're going to really start to kind of work together as a team, and they're going to be able to override veto after veto after veto, showing that there is a true discord between the president and Congress. Now, here's just a political cartoon from this time period, and it really tries to show that President Johnson sees himself as the good guy. He sees himself as the martyr. He says that he's trying to make a better America, to unite the country, that the South needs to be forgiven, that they need to move past all this bloodshed. And he says, if my blood is to be shed because I vindicate the Union and the preservation of this government in its original purity and character, let it be shed. Let an altar to the Union be erected, and then if it is necessary, take me and lay me upon it, and the blood that now warms and animates my existence shall be poured out as a fit libation to the Union. So he's trying to show that, Congress is the bad guy and he is the good guy. Yes, he's trying to unite America and bring it back together, but it's also at the expense of an entire, group of people, at 3.5 million former slaves. And many people in the North are saying, okay, we just had almost 700,000 people die to end slavery and to bring about black rights. Now you're basically letting a new form of slavery take hold. That's not acceptable. Stop playing this role of the martyr, as you can see the kind of the biblical references here. So what Congress decides to do is they say, okay, we passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It's going to create equality for African Americans temporarily. But what happens if in the future some racist, group of people come into office, into Congress, and they get rid of the law? I mean, laws can be made and laws can be gotten rid of over time. So they decide we need a new amendment or addition to the Constitution. Okay, and so just like the 13th addition to the Constitution had been added, the first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. The 13th Amendment, of course, ends slavery. They passed the 14th Amendment, which basically allows equal protection under the laws. And it says everybody is the same. Everybody is allowed, what we call due process. People have these same rights, just like it was stated in the Declaration of Independence, to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness. And by passing this constitutional amendment, it's going to stop, African Americans from being mistreated. It's going to get rid of black codes completely. And it's going to kind of take away power from some of these, ex-Confederates who are now taking control of the Confederacy. And it's going to guarantee the rights of the freed blacks. And of course, the Southern states are going to be incredibly angry about it. But since the moderate Republicans and the radical Republicans are working together, and they pretty much control the government, and they've kicked out, those Southern members of the House and Senate that were elected, saying you were elected illegally, so to speak. The government is all made up of Republicans, so naturally they're able to get this passed. Now, President Johnson is going to go around the country at this point in 1866, when it's time to elect members to the House and the Senate again. It's what we call a midterm election. A president's elected every 4 years, but members of the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years. Members of the Senate are elected every 6 years. So in the middle of a president's term, you get a midterm or by-election. So he goes around the country at this point on kind of a whistle-stop tour. You can see him on the back of the train there, and he's trying to get people to say, don't support the 14th Amendment, we can't get this passed. And even though he makes these speeches, most people do not agree with him in America. It's kind of like the 11 ex-Southern states are kind of one group, and the rest of the North is an entirely different group, and they're very much divided. And the Republicans win more so than ever before. They win a 3-1 majority in the House and the Senate. They control every northern state. They get the 14th Amendment passed, and they feel more so than ever before that they have this mandate or this, control over the government, and that it is their job to fulfill Lincoln's original mission, which is to create equality in America. And so not only to end slavery with the 13th Amendment and to create equality with the 14th Amendment, but now they want to get the 15th Amendment passed, which is to give African Americans the right to vote. And so it's at this point that Congress takes control of Reconstruction. And they say, look, this hasn't worked so far. Johnson's plan brought a bunch of racists back to power who had black codes, which we've now gotten rid of, but we need to show the South who's boss, that they lost the war, that they'll never have states' rights again, and that they need to comply with these new laws. So at this point, we have radical Reconstruction or congressional Reconstruction, where Congress takes control. The South is going to be divided into 5 military zones. They're going to take a U.S. general and put him in charge of each zone. They're going to put U.S. troops throughout the South. And a state can only get readmitted to the Union if they agree to the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, the 14th Amendment to create equality, and they need to support the 15th Amendment, which gives African Americans the right to vote. They need to get rid of all black codes. Men need to take a true loyalty oath. No one who had top ranks in the Confederacy is going to be allowed to run for office. So this is going to be a complete overhaul, and this is going to be the final plan for Reconstruction. This is the one that's going to take effect. And here's just a picture of what I was talking about. And so you can see the Military District 1, that's up by Virginia, Military District 2 into the Carolinas, the District 3 is throughout Florida, District 4 into Arkansas, and then District 5 through Texas and Louisiana. And basically it was just divided up by population and in terms of geographic area. And they basically said, you will submit or potentially we're going to have another war again. And the South was in no way, shape, or form ready to fight. People were over that. They don't have the money. They don't have the resources. And so they submit to this plan, this Military Reconstruction Act. So this Military Reconstruction Act of 1867 is what brings about Congressional Reconstruction or Radical Reconstruction, where Congress takes control and says, this is what you will do if you want to get readmitted to the Union. This is the only way we can move forward. Now, President Johnson, as you can imagine, is very, very angry about the fact that he feels like he's been showed up, that he's the President of the United States, he's the leader, he's lost power, that him and Congress are at odds, that they're controlling Reconstruction. He feels like the rest of the world is laughing at him. And it's constant fighting. You know, Congress continues to pass laws, he vetoes them, they override his veto. That's how the Congressional Reconstruction Act of 1867, this military act, got passed. So they basically set a trap. They want to kick Johnson out of office. They want to impeach him, which is what happens when you kick a president out of office. So they passed 2 laws. One's called the Command of the Army Act, which basically says that the president, as he issues Reconstruction orders, he also has to confer with the commander of the military. Now that is going to make the president mad because he is commander-in-chief of the army and he should not have to look to the top U.S. general basically for guidance or support. Usually they confer with each other, but the president is the head honcho. So that's going to tick him off. The law that really ticks him off, though, is a stupid law. Okay, you might have heard the word tenure before about teachers. Like teachers have tenure, meaning like they've worked at some place, it's hard for them to get fired, they've worked there for a long time. So this one is called the Tenure of Office Act. And the idea is that the president's cabinet members, his group of advisors, now have tenure. They've worked there for a long time. And if the president would like to fire any of them, he needs to ask for the Senate's consent or approval. This is a dumb law. Technically, the way it is written in the Constitution, if the president wants to add members to his cabinet, he has to ask Senate to approve them, like to do a background check, make sure they're okay. But if he wants to fire them because he disagrees with them or thinks they're doing a bad job, he has the right to do so at any way and any time whatsoever. So they set this law basically as a trap, knowing it was a dumb law, knowing he would violate it, hoping they could catch him on it in a crime, and then they could remove him from office. It was not very nice. Like, this was a dramatic time in history. So what happens is that Johnson goes ahead and he fires that man in the picture, Edwin Stanton. Okay, he was Secretary of State, and he was a holdover from Lincoln's cabinet, meaning that Lincoln had chosen him. I think he was technically Secretary of War. I said Secretary of State. And he fires him. Well, when he fires him, Congress is very swift. And they say, what? You can't fire him without the Senate's approval. You just broke the law. You are now guilty of committing a crime, which is considered, high crimes and misdemeanors. It's a very general statement, okay? And now he's going to go to trial. Now, the way that an impeachment trial works to remove a president from office is first in the House of Representatives, with the Supreme Court justice at the time overseeing the proceedings. It kind of takes, the form of a regular trial. The House just decides that there is enough evidence to bring forth charges against the president. And in the House of Representatives, they impeached him. Okay, you can see the numbers there. 126 to 47 felt that he was guilty of some crime, of high crimes and misdemeanors. That there was enough evidence to go forward with a true trial. Okay. Now, the actual trial, where you see like more of a judge, so to speak, and that's usually the head of the Supreme Court who's kind of overseeing this, that's where the trial takes place. And this went on for 11 weeks. So if you kind of remember what happened earlier this year when President Trump was on trial, I guess that was last December, for impeachment charges, it seemed like it went on for a while. That's pretty common. It was 11 weeks at this point in time. And the Senate decided to not impeach him, to not remove him from office. So even though the House had said there was evidence that he was guilty, and the Senate basically said there was evidence that he was guilty as well, they chose not to remove him from office. Okay, so it was 35 to 19. Okay, now why? Because a lot of people said he may be guilty of this crime, but it was kind of a trap. We went too far. We can't actually remove a president from office for this. Otherwise, we're setting a dangerous precedent that just because we disagree with the president's politics, we're allowed to remove him from office. And at this point in time, 3 presidents have been brought up on impeachment charges. You've got President Johnson, President Clinton, President Trump, but it's been the same result each time, that the Senate has never agreed to actually remove them from office, even if people perhaps have felt that they were guilty. And so what this has meant is that after, President Johnson loses kind of in the House, but wins in the Senate and has not been removed from office, he kind of calms down after this, and he accepts that Congress is in control of Reconstruction. He accepts that we're now going through a new era called Black Reconstruction, that African Americans are going to get more rights, including the right to vote. And he just kind of stays very quiet the rest of his presidency and chooses not to run for political office, because he sees that he can't really get any laws passed anyway, because Republicans are the majority in Congress. And so African Americans, of course, as they'll be getting the right to vote, they're going to go out and register. They're going to vote in huge numbers. And when you look at this chart, you can see that the purple shows Black members, the blue shows white members, and you can see in all these states, especially in South Carolina, there's actually more African Americans than whites in that state. They're going to have a huge impact on upcoming elections, and they're going to be voting Republican, thanking the Republican Party for obviously ending the Black codes, ensuring that the 13th, the 14th, and then the 15th Amendment are passed. So they're going to have a huge impact on Southern politics, making many Southerners angry. And so we're going to see this period of time called Black Reconstruction, where African Americans for the next 10 years are going to vote, they're going to run for office, okay? And they're going to really be treated equally for the first time in history. And so now African Americans are going to have the ability to open up their own business. Not that they'll have any money to do so, but if they could get a loan from someone, they're going to have the ability to perhaps buy their own farmland, to run for office, to vote, to move across the country. Some will choose to move out west to get away from racist groups like the KKK, which will be on the rise. Women, of course, are going to be treated less than men, and even though men get the right to vote, Black men with the 15th Amendment, women still cannot vote. So the 15th Amendment, even though it grants the right to vote, be clear that it's still just to Black men, not to Black women. Women don't get the right to vote till after World War I. And you can see this picture here. Hiram Revels becomes the first Black senator. African Americans are somewhat afraid to vote because we start to see the rise of the KKK, but most are going out in record numbers and supporting the Republican Party, trying to get infrastructure passed to, help African Americans get better jobs, better lives. And we're going to start to see Black colleges be built. Booker T. Washington will be one of the advocates for education, saying the only way African Americans are going to get a better life is if they go to a trade school, if they learn some kind of skill, if they get an education. They can't just be farm hands. Some African Americans, like I said, will think about moving out west to get a better life. And we'll stop there for today. Have a great day, guys.